All right, welcome to the Mind Muse podcast. Today we have a really special episode because Karith and I felt like this is a conversation that was worth having, and it's a conversation that we hope sparks conversations around the world and around this country to help bring healing to a very difficult time in our history. And so we're not really sure what's going to come out of this, what we're actually going to say, but we hope that in a way it serves as a model to have these conversations. And Karith is actually a diversity specialist. She's very, very educated as well. She'll fill in the blanks. I have her very impressive bio in front of me, but if I miss anything, please fill us in. She's a speaker, a humorist, a comedian. She's a TV and radio personality. She's been on a lot of different media platforms that you would recognize. She's an author, an entrepreneur, and a wife. And she's all about having a sense of humor, even when we're dealing with very taboo subjects. And her whole specialty is about diversity and really changing the discussion around diversity and how it has been taught for decades. So welcome, Karith, to the show.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much for having me back. And I that was a great intro. And I love that the last thing you said was changing the discussion and the conversation around diversity. And the first way that I'm actually attempting to change it is by using a different word. Because when a lot of people hear diversity, like, we know it's a positive thing, right? To have a diverse portfolio, even to have a diverse environment, because you're getting different ideas and thoughts and experiences for other people. However, when you're trying to teach diversity, right, or impart how we can better get along, it's been tainted a bit. It's almost like the word's been hijacked. And I mean that because a lot of times when people come in to teach training on diversity, people are divided into groups. If you're a woman, person of color, someone in the LGBTQIA community, you are considered diverse. If you are not in either of those categories, you're not diverse. And I think that's a really poor way to even try to start the conversation, by dividing people up further. We already know we're different, right? Nobody in the same family is the same. So it's kind of like the law of attraction. If that's where our focus is, that's where we're going to go. Oh, well, we're so different. We're so different. How can we possibly come together? So I like to flip the switch, and with the terminology that I actually trademarked called inversity. Inversity is still a nod to acknowledging, respecting, honoring the different qualities, characteristics, ethnicities, traits that we bring to the table. But instead of focusing on what separates and divides us, why don't we focus instead on what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? But most importantly, how can we be introspective, right? Meaning understanding your value, your worth, your connection to humanity. And I think if we can, that can be a starting point, then we can see some major shifts.
That is so brilliant. I am a student of words. I love language. And the point you made about diversity, think about those first three letters, D-I-V. It's the first three letters of divide, which is exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing right now, which is uniting and loving and showing that we care. And then the inversity, I love that too, because the first two letters is I-N, in, which is inclusive. It's introspective. All those words that you said, that is just completely blew the lid off the whole conversation right there. So that's amazing. So yeah. So, I mean, how did we get here? I mean, I know, like, for decades we've been watching shows and movies that have stereotypes, and we've been taking diversity training at businesses that either we run or we've been a part of. So all of these things could be the answer, but what, in your viewpoint, like, why do you think we're here where we are right now?
I was speaking to my mother, who obviously is Black. Not obviously, I shouldn't say that because that isn't obvious. But my mother is Black. She is fair complected, but she's Black. She grew up in the 60s. And I asked her, I said, with everything that's going on right now, what's the difference between now and the 60s when there was this like love, peace, Martin Luther King Jr., JFK, bringing everybody together moment. And she said something that was very, very disconcerting for me. She said, back then we had hope. And that upset me because I do have hope. I will not let go of my hope. But I get it from her perspective as someone who grew up seeing signs and having water fountains that were designated for white people versus her and her family. And then you think you've gone further, and then we have things that are happening right now in the world. So it's almost been like this series, I think, of 3 steps forward, 6 steps back. And I think how we talk about this now is critical. This is bigger than just jumping on the bandwagon of having a hashtag. This is bigger than, being part of a protest. Not that protests aren't really good. Peaceful protests are powerful, and I think they help people feel empowered. But after you go home, how are you going to live your life in a way that keeps promoting what you now say you stand for and what you may have stood for a very long time? I think for a lot of people, their eyes have been opened to the fact that it is so ingrained, this idea of bias in stereotyping, right? I don't think it's intentional always, but there are 3 things. When I go in and I do a session for a corporation or university or college, I talk about the 3 reasons we stereotype. The first is that it's human nature. This is kind of a fight or flight thing. It goes back to survival. Is something going to be a threat to me? But back in the day when we were cave people, is this going to be physical threat, right? Like a warring tribe or a saber-toothed tiger. Now, while there's still an element of physical threat there, is this going to be an emotional threat? Am I going to be taken out of my comfort zone because that person is the other? And I don't know how to deal with that or handle it or say the right thing. The second reason we stereotype is because we've learned, we have picked it up. I know you are familiar with Jack Canfield and his, he's the guy, Chicken Soup for the Soul, but he's also an incredible orator and speaker. And I've seen him multiple times. And one of the things that I learned from him is we're born with 2 fears. That's it, 2 fears. The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else we've learned. So we've learned to be afraid of other people. We've learned to see ourselves different from other people. We've picked that up from our families. What they've told us about other people and what they've told us about ourselves, right? We've learned by watching television and movies and playing video games. I grew up on Disney, like I'm sure so many, people in our generation have. And, what do the princesses look like? That's what our vision is. That's become ingrained in our psyche of what, the idea of beauty is. And even though they're getting more diverse, they're still thin. They still have certain features. We learn this stuff. And the last reason is we have an ego, right? We have an ego, or they call it the id. And it's a really powerful thing. And the ego likes to be in charge and likes to know where it stands. And how better to know where you stand and feel like you're right than by putting someone in a category, putting someone in a box, and doing the same thing for yourself.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like as humans, we really want to categorize things. We want to name things because that's how we understand the world. That's one of our creative powers. We have the power to create, we have the power to destroy, and we have the power to name things. And, it is so limiting when, just like you said, regardless of skin color, right? When you categorize yourself, oh, I do this, therefore I am a person who does this, you know, like a dentist or a doctor. That's not your identity. That's not who you actually are, right? It's much more infinite than that. You know, you could say things like, I'm a creator, or I'm, you know, I'm an innovator, or these words that don't have a limit to them, right? I also want to go back to what you were saying about the Disney princesses. Okay, so when I was growing up, there was this show called The Cosby Show. We watched it as a family every week. So
Yep.
what were the things that I was learning at a young age watching this show? Do you know, like what would you say to that? Like,
I grew up on that too, right?
Yeah.
And I used to think, do the writers have a camera in our house? Because the episodes
Okay.
were so much, because my life was such a reflection of that,
Okay.
right? Versus the previous sitcoms that had Black families in it, like Good Times, right? Or What's Happening. And
Different Strokes was another one.
Yeah, Different Strokes, but that was different because there wasn't like a Black parent there.
Oh, okay.
Right? Different Strokes was Mr. Drummond, who'd adopted these two poor Black kids who'd been his like housekeepers' kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Cosby Show was monumental for so many people for multiple reasons. One is that you saw a nuclear family that was Black, which you hadn't really seen before on television. And they were just the normal suburban, even though they were in New York and Brooklyn, family. They were two professionals. The mom was a professional. She was a lawyer. The dad was a doctor. And the thing is, there have been generations of doctors and teachers and professionals in Black families. But people who'd never experienced it or didn't know families like that, they didn't know that existed. Like for a lot of people, that was just fiction. But for my family and my history, that was reality. But it was so refreshing to see that. And, you know, it's so unfortunate that not just for him, obviously for his victims, but that Bill Cosby had such a public and tragic downfall, because what he represented for so many, especially comedians like myself, was this ability to be bigger than your race or your ethnicity, right? To be bigger than the label that was put on you as a Black person in America. He was America's dad.
Mm-hmm.
He was America's dad. And you know, I actually had a show after I was on IMUS in the morning called America's Girlfriend, because that's what I wanted to be. I didn't want to be defined just by being Black. I didn't want to be defined by the color of my skin. Because there is, like you said, we are so multidimensional. To just be categorized by those small things. It's absurd. And I think, you know, when we were talking off air, after the last time we chatted, you know, I mentioned going to study abroad. I studied at Oxford in England. And what was so beautiful about my experience there was I felt this freedom, because I was just Karith and I was just American. I wasn't Black. I wasn't African American. I wasn't color. I was just Karith. And I didn't even realize I was carrying that weight until it wasn't there anymore. And I think that's kind of what's happening right now for a lot of people, is people are understanding there are people who maybe your friends, your close friends, who because of their skin color have an extra weight on them that you would never know because you've never had to carry it. And that's not your fault. I don't think there's any room for shame or guilt. But what I do think is, now that we're having this great awakening, people, you can't unsee what you've seen, right? You can't unhear what you're hearing. And so to move forward, it's not to sweep it under the rug and be like, oh, okay, you know, or claim you're woke, or just go to a protest, or just write BLM, you know, on your or black out your face. But like, that's not what the work is. The work is moving forward in your actions now, to look out for when things aren't looking like they're balanced or equal or fair. And paying attention, you know, actually listening to what people are saying. And this is an exercise that everybody needs to practice. You know, I give an example when I teach about active listening. And it's hand in hand with responsible reactions. But active listening is, you know, the expression is not what you say, but how you say it. Well, sometimes it's not what you hear, but how you interpret it. The very simple question, where are you from, can mean totally different things to people based on their experience. I grew up in a very privileged life. There's no getting around it. I grew up with my two parents. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood. I'm educated. I have had access to, all of the wonderful benefits of the quote unquote, American life, right? When I hear where you're from, I think people are asking, they hear a little bit of my Southern accent, right? But for some people, the where are you from is, do you belong here? Because that is a question they get asked, and that is sometimes what people mean. So it's a responsibility on both people's ends to think about what they're saying, but also how they're hearing it. And if they're not sure, delving deeper and say, well, why do you ask? Where did that come from? That's where the responsible reactions come in.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because we can very easily take things out of context because of previous experiences. I mean, I know I have, and we're not talking about color again in this discussion. I mean, we are, but we're not. Like it is a universal human thing to be triggered by something that someone says, and like that maybe that's not even what they meant. That's not even like where they were coming from at all. But it's how you receive the message and how the message is given, and equally they are both important, right? And really understanding where the other person is coming from, whether you're the receiver or the messenger in the situation, right?
Absolutely.
That's great.
This is about raising people's EQs, emotional quotient, without insulting their IQs.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said that. Yes. Yeah. And these are very interesting times. And I feel like, using some critical thinking skills are also in order. Right. And really looking at what are the images that I'm being shown here on social media, on the news, in, pop culture. We mentioned Cosby Show. And that was good for me to hear, because I had no idea. I'm like thinking back all the shows that I've ever watched, like what have I actually been taught? Like trying to, think of like all the things that have come into my personal experience that have taught me the way to look at life. And that critical thinking skills is actually help, when you do that, you're separating, well, what do I really think? What do I really feel? And separating that from what I'm being shown and taking that at face value.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that one. I think for a lot of people, they take things at face value, like the news. Why wouldn't they be telling me the truth? Why wouldn't they be? The only problem is, and I'm not talking about one network in particular, I'm talking about all of them.
Right. I agree.
News is a business. Okay. They are a business and they want to make money. That doesn't mean that they aren't giving you information. They are. But are they giving you all of the information, or are they giving you the information that's going to make you keep turning in so you can't turn away? So you become just so invested. I call myself a recovered journalist. I got my degree in broadcasting. And I was in the business for a while at a local level, a small ABC affiliate, and then a national level, both on ABC radio out of New York, and I worked for The View. And while that wasn't news, it was Barbara Walters and it was network TV, and it was still a medium for disseminating information and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And what I learned there was, I learned a great deal. I learned how to produce and write and book, and it was a wonderful experience. But to me, it wasn't fulfilling because it was lacking in being able to, I feel like, tell the whole truth, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. That's why I was so attracted to stand-up comedy, because comedy was just like, wow, there were no barriers. There was nobody saying you can't say that. And not that I'm foul or vulgar, I didn't need it for that reason. I needed it because I wanted to be able to express myself fully and shed light on some of the taboo things and make people think. about stuff that's going on. And I think the great comics of our time and before have done that, you know, from Dave Chappelle back to Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory, you know, George Carlin, excuse me, Lenny Bruce, you know, Bill Hicks, brilliant people who may have seemed like they were kind of stepping over the line, but in doing so, they made you think. Mm-hmm. And it made you go, huh, I never saw it that way before. And that's why I use humor in a lot of the work that I do. Because nobody should be lectured on this stuff. The best way to get somebody not interested is to lecture them or shame them or tell them you're wrong for thinking this way. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for thinking anyway. I just want to open your eyes to another way to maybe see something or interpret it or view it. I want you to have epiphanies on your own. I am just a guide in this.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly what we need. Again, the critical thinking. You're sparking that critical thinking through the humor and talking about these taboo, painful subjects and getting people to really look at it without being, you know, what did they used to do? Throw tomatoes at the person if they didn't like what they were saying.
Get pulled off the
hook. Yeah, the crook. Yeah. So
we were just talking about, you know, how you have these conversations. And one of the things is yes, to be open, but also to not find offense in everything. You know, it's really easy to be offended these days. It's really easy to take something out of context. It's really easy. But I think where you come into your responsibility is what is the person's intention, right? What was behind what they said? And I call it the 7 C's. Why people say wackadoodle stuff, right? The first 2 are couth and class. Sometimes people just don't have any, right? They just don't have it. They weren't raised right. I don't know what else their problem was, but they just don't have it. They're not classy. They don't have any couth. They just don't have it. The second is people are careless. You know, they just, it slips out. They weren't thinking about it. Like it just didn't occur to them that was like, oh yeah, like it was like a brain fart, right? The fourth is clueless. And I have fallen into that category completely.
We all have, I think. Yeah.
Everybody, okay, let me ask you a question. What do you call it when you sit down cross-legged on the floor? Like when your kids sit down cross-legged?
Oh my gosh. Well, this is what we've been taught since we were in kindergarten. It's Indian style.
That's Lotus what I grew up. That's how I grew up with it, right? I will go speak at these colleges now and to these young kids and these teenagers. And I ask them that question, and you know what they say?
What?
Crisscross applesauce. That's
really?
What it's called now. That's what it's called. The only reason I know it's called that is because my kids were in a karate class. And the instructor's like, okay, everybody, come up, sit down, crisscross applesauce. I'm like, that's not crisscross apples. That's Oh, yeah. I can see why that would be considered not appropriate anymore, you know? But would that ever occur to you if that was how you were raised? Like, why would you think anything else?
Right. That's just what it's called, right?
Until you're taught, you know, until you know, until you learn. Mm-hmm. So, like, for people to be mad at me or think I was being like this horrible, ignorant person and like, berate me for that, like, I just didn't know any better until I was taught. And that's what's happening right now for a lot of people. They're being taught. Back on track with the C's. Let's see, I said couth, class, careless, clueless, comfortable. Comfortable is one. I think sometimes people get a little comfortable with where they are, thinking they're in, a certain company and saying things that they probably know aren't right, but they do it anyway because they're like, oh, that person's not going to mind or not going to say anything. Most accidents in our cars happen within like a 5-mile radius from home. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we're comfortable. Mm-hmm. We know that we're not paying as much attention. We know the terrain, right? And then the last C is callous. And some people are just a-holes. There's just no getting around that. There are some people who are just jerks, and they're gonna be jerks. I am of the belief that hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. So, I never tell anyone you have to work through it with them. That's your own personal individual decision. How much time and energy you're going to give someone else. Do I believe every heart and mind can be changed? I do. But again, that's your personal choice.
When it comes to teaching, or when it comes to talking about this in a corporate environment, what are you currently guiding companies to do and to say? If there's a CEO or entrepreneur listening to this that wonders, well, I have some staff that might be hurting in this situation. Is it better to talk to them directly, privately, have a company meeting, hire someone like you to come in? Like, what's the right thing?
Of course, hiring me is the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
Talk to you. But part of why is because of my approach. And what I tell all leaders is that, I think every person who is a leader understands that there are going to be growing pains. That is how you gain strength. It's like athletes. They know that their work is happening within their bodies when their muscles are sore. That's when the body's repairing itself because it has been pushed to another level. And then what happens? You're stronger, you can do more, you're more powerful. And that's what this work is about. Getting in there, doing the hard work, having the uncomfortable conversations, learning how to have conversations, how to hear what their employees are saying, all of them, and figuring out a way to move forward and let that pain, that discomfort, turn into fuel and strength. Because listen, everybody's company, I don't care who you are, what you do, you want to be profitable, right? Well, you can only be profitable if you have people who feel valued. Well, how do you show people they feel valued? You show them that they are of value and they have value to you by holding them as valuable. And by listening, by having programs, and I don't just mean like catering to the what do they call them? They call them certain kinds of groups. It's slipping my mind right now. But there'll be like a Hispanic organization, a Black organization, and this. But the problem is, it's usually just like the Black people who are in that group, or the Hispanic people who are in that group, or the LGBTQIA people who are in this group. And it really should be like everybody should be like intermingling within these groups so they hear what's going on. And I do have a problem with, like, to me, it seems someone like modern day segregation. It kind of goes back to the whole idea of safe spaces. Like, understandably, safe spaces should be a place where everyone can come to the table and share their experiences, not you're excluded because you don't think the way I do, or you express yourself the way I do. It should be safe in that everyone's opinions should be allowed and heard, but you do it in a respectful manner.
Yeah. I recently had an experience with a mastermind, and this group think was very pervasive. Everyone kind of had a similar business model, used a similar type of marketing campaign, and very successful 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs. However, it was really lacking in diversity of thought, or inversity. I'll start using your word. And, I started getting a little bit lost in this group because I kept feeling like, wait a second, I have a different thought here. I have a different opinion. And it was clear that I was one of the few that had that thought or opinion. And it made me afraid to share.
Sure.
And this can happen anywhere, right? We've got to foster these psychologically safe groups so that we can have discussion without fear of criticism or backlash or anything like that. Because, when we divide, we lose. Famous president once said, divided we fall, united we stand. So
I love that you brought up diversity of thought, because that should be part of the conversation as well. I think, and that's another reason why I really prefer the term inversity, because diversity, when people think of it traditionally, they just think of, the color of your skin, you practice a different religion, you you're in this category based on how you look or how you love or how you pray. And the reality is, like, true diversity is, it runs the gamut from our nationality, our age, the languages we speak, our socioeconomic status, and how we think, our political affiliations. Those are all things that bring diversity to the table. And, they're not, you can have one and have different things from different categories. They're not mutually exclusive. You can't just be this and this is where you stand and this is where you stay. Like, it's a multi-dynamic situation. We're not monoliths. And when we go in the realm of diversity, well, you must be this if you're in this category. How can you possibly, be an artist and an actor and be conservative? Like, that's just, because it doesn't fit the stereotype that we like to use to be comfortable. And I think you touched on that earlier too. This idea of comfort. When I was on a very, very popular morning news show, I shared that this is the time for us to be uncomfortable. Because through that discomfort, as I said, comes transformation. Much like a butterfly, right?
Or an oyster who makes the pearl, right? From the friction.
From that pressure.
Yeah.
That butterfly coming out of the chrysalis, that isn't comfortable. It's trying to squeeze through that teeny tiny little hole with that fat little body. Totally. But if it doesn't, the fluid from its body will not go into its wings and it cannot soar. And that's what we need to do as individuals, as communities, as a country. We need to soar. We got to get uncomfortable. We got to go through some of the crud to get onto the other side where we can soar. And I do think it's possible. I obviously didn't have the same experiences as my mother. I've had a very different experience, but I've also still seen things. And I know that the reality she experienced, it exists for many still, but I have hope for a better world. I have hope that I know there are more good people than bad. I know there are more people who understand why this is an issue now and why we need to address it, versus living in fear that it's going to take something away from them. I think it's going to be uncomfortable for a little while, but that's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. That's not a bad thing. We just don't like to be uncomfortable. We don't. Who likes to be uncomfortable? Nobody. I want to be outside, in the pool, hanging out, getting a little sun, not too much, because I actually burn, surprisingly. And but who doesn't want that? But the reality is, I got work to do. I got conversations to have that aren't going to be easy for everybody, myself included sometimes.
So let's get a little more uncomfortable, shall we?
All right. I love it. Let's do it.
So talk to me. And again, this is your opinion. You're not representing like a huge group of people. And again, we're modeling how to have this conversation, right? And I'm listening to everything you're saying. I'm not going to argue, it's like your opinion, right? We're allowed to have our opinions, right? And it's, again, like you said, not about convincing someone to come to your side of the situation, right? So, but I would love your thoughts on these things. So a lot of people are seeing like Black Lives Matter. Okay. And they're saying, well, I think what you're saying is Black Lives Matter too, but they counter with all lives matter or blue lives matter. Why is this not helping things?
Whew, that is a good, hard question. And it's hard because people will have different opinions. This is my personal opinion, again, not speaking for anyone but myself. I would like to say that I think Black people, especially the ones who are part of the BLM movement, aren't saying all lives don't matter. Of course, all lives matter. Of course. But if everybody believed that, we wouldn't have to say Black Lives Matter. And it's because of the disparity in so many situations. It's because of the, not just what we've seen on TV, but the experiences that Black individuals have had. Sometimes it's been encounters with the police and they've been scary or violent. Sometimes it's as simple enough as being passed over for a role, or not, being included in meetings in corporate America, being thought of as less than. To say, listen, I matter too. And like you said, I think that, mattering too, I just don't think it's as effective. It doesn't sound as good, like Black Lives Matter too.
Right. It doesn't.
but that's really the point. That's the message. Like, hey, look, we matter. Please understand, we matter. We want you to value us as the human beings that we are. We're not saying that Asian lives don't matter, or white lives, or Hispanic lives, or, people who are gay, like that, those matter. And of course, blue lives matter, police lives matter. These are the people who've been designated to be the protectors of society. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now are the ones who have abused that power. But there are so many more who went into it because they want to do a good job. They want to serve and protect their communities. Like with the news, you're not going to see all the good stuff and all the good stories because that doesn't sell.
Yeah. If it bleeds, it leads. That's what the media sells you.
Exactly.
Blood.
Exactly. And listen, there are so many Black people and people of color who have family who are police officers. One of my very dear friends, who is he's also, in theater and arts, but he serves. He's been an officer. And think about how many people who are in the armed forces who are, you talk about a multicultural affair, and you go in there and you're supposed to be not taught to see color, because this is the person who's going to have your back. You shouldn't give a rat's fat fanny what color they are if you need their life to save yours, and vice versa. Again, it's this silly division that we've been taught, right? That's been exacerbated by what we've seen in media and movies and video games, that because of the packages we come in, we're different. It's absurd. It's absurd. I think I'd shared with you, again, when we're on the air, but I lecture at Stanford, and I was there this past year as part of the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program. I was there as a visiting expert, and they had other visiting experts, and one was a scientist, a biologist, and he was talking about CRISPR and DNA and genes and all these things that were just like fascinating, because that's not my world at all. But I stayed and I listened, and it was phenomenal what I was taking in. And I stayed after to talk to him, and I wanted to know, how close are we genetically? Like what really does separate us? Is it, where our families are from? Like, when people do that whole ancestry, they trace their DNA. Is it our blood type? Like what separates us from one another? And he looked me dead in the eye. He goes, Karith, we are 99.99986% the same. Like, we are all having hissy fits about the 10,000ths of a percentage that sets us apart. So we have to change our perspective. That's a big part of what has to happen in corporate America. We have to change our perspective. Yes, we have to take into account people's different experiences, but we have to have that conscious empathy. And that's being able to say, okay, how does it feel for that person? And what is it like? Two things that we'll never fully be able to do, because we'll never be able to swap lives. I mean, this isn't a movie. This is real life. I'll never know what it's like to be you. You'll never know what it's like to be me. But we can hear each other out and hear our experiences and take that in.
Yeah, it's so interesting, that 0.000 whatever percent. I mean, that's melanin, right? That's the factor in the skin. And my husband was telling me he lived in Mexico for some time, and some of the people there, they would put on a bunch of sunscreen, and he's like, well, do you really burn? And well, no, but I don't want my skin to get any darker, because that means something in their culture, right? And so, I mean, we're talking about Mexico, you know, there's no real like huge population of white people there. This is Hispanics we're talking about, right? And so it's just melanin, right? I mean, now what would you say to people who are like listening to this and they're like, it's not just melanin, you know, there's culture, there's, you know, the way you talk. Share that story, please, about when you were auditioning for a role in Hollywood.
Oh, sure. Well, back to the whole it's just melanin thing, because like you said, people are probably going, no, it's more than that. And it's not that it's not more than that. It's the perception, right, behind the being darker. It's how people have been treated around the globe based on their color. Here in America, you know, I used to have white friends in high school who would, I swear to God, put Crisco on to go tan. Because I'm like, why do I smell chicken? They wanted to look like me, right? There are people in Africa and even America who bleach their skin because they want to be lighter. There are people in Asia who wear, you know, the look that you want to go for is pale and red hair, because that's considered, you know, a higher level of, you know, because I think for so many, you were viewed based on your color. Because if you were, and this has to do with class as well, if you were darker, then that meant you were outside in the sun. You weren't of nobility. You didn't have money. You had to be out there. You couldn't be inside luxuriating in the shade. So that was a differential of, you know, that showed people where you stood class-wise.
Yeah, that's where we also get redneck too, in the white community, redneck. Same thing, working class.
Exactly. So, the story about my voice. So, you know, that's just another way we like to try to pit people against each other. Well, you don't sound a certain way. You don't sound, I mean, I can't tell you how many times growing up I was told or teased for not sounding Black, right? And I'm talking friends, significant others, family members, on every color, and what was interesting is, you know, I get to New York City, like the land of like a bajillion ethnicities, which was I fell in love with it for. It was so different from the suburb I grew up in, North Texas. And I loved it. And I would go out for these roles, African-American roles. And when I would go out for voiceovers, because that's what my agent would send me out for, because duh, hello, look at me. I'd get there and I'd speak and I'd do the part, and he'd be like, oh, listen, Karith, what we're going for is an urban sound. Can you do that? And Mama was like, can you jazz it up a little? And I was like, so you want me to scat? Like, what the hell does that mean? Jazz it up a little. Like, I am from the suburbs of North Dallas. Like, this is how I talk. This is how my friends talk. And they've been teaching, but it's like, it's so crazy that we, again, have to stereotype people. And well, if you fit in this category, you look this way, then you should sound this way, or you should act this way. And it's so absurd. And I'm certainly not the only person who's ever had to deal with that. You know, what's interesting enough is, you know, I have a couple friends who are white who grew up in primarily either Hispanic or Black areas. And they'll say stuff or use terminology, and people are like, why are you trying to act Black? Why are you trying to? And it's like, they're not trying to act anything. That's just part of how they grew up. That's part of who they are. They're not putting on airs. They're not, you know, fronting, as we say. But what is so funny is when I do get on stage, you know, doing just stand up, I will see my audience stare at me, because they're like, what? Like, is she going to like stop talking like that and the real voice is going to come out? Like, so they'll just stare at me for like the first couple minutes. Like, what is she, like, this can't really, because it's such a mind, we'll call it twist for them. It's such a mind twist for them, because it goes against everything that they thought they knew. And it's kind of cool. because I love that it's making people have that critical thinking, like we said, and just kind of switch how they see things, because it triggers, like, you know, a different synopsis in the brain. She's like, oh, maybe not everybody who's Black does this or says this or acts that way. And it's been, listen, I'm not gonna lie, it has been a cross to bear, but it's okay, because that's who I am and I'm being true to myself. And it was hard for a long time. I now know, like, what a gift it is to be able to speak to so many different people. It sucked when I was, you know, earlier. I missed out on so many jobs in entertainment because I didn't fit the stereotype. And I refused to bend to be what they wanted. So I lost out. But that's okay. To me, I still had my integrity intact. And I know acting is acting, but I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to be that representation. You know, that's why I've taken certain jobs that I have. When I joined up with Imus in the morning, I was on air with him after he had the Rutgers debacle, calling the Rutgers women's basketball team nappy-headed hoes. I remember thinking, if I don't take this job, someone else will, and they may not be as responsible with the position. This is my chance to be the anti-stereotype of what we typically see of Black women in the media. This is my chance.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you did. So, I mean, okay, I'm really curious. What would you say to people who, you know, so I'm not old enough to remember the 60s. I remember my parents, you know, they went through it, but yet they didn't live in the South where it got really, really bad. And, you know, I look at life. So, you know, we've had the first Black president, you know, we've had Oprah, who had like the #1 talk show. You know, we've had things like the Cosby Show that showed a very healthy environment, like you mentioned. What do you say to the people who are like, wait, I didn't know there was a problem? Like, what? What's going on?
Well, I say now's the time to understand that there is. And again, I think there's some people who knew and chose to kind of look the other way, but there's some people who truly were like, what? And I get it. Like, as privileged a life as I've had, there are some things I'm hearing, stories I'm hearing from friends who I grew up with, who had really horrible adverse incidents. And I'm not saying I haven't had uncomfortable things happen. You know, thank God. Every time I've had an encounter with a police officer, it's been, well, I won't say positive, because I did get a couple speeding tickets, but it wasn't like I feared for my life. You know what I mean? I've had friends who've had that fear for their life thing. So to me, it was kind of a foreign thing. Like, and it's not like I'm hearing it for the first time. Like, I knew that my brother had to be extra careful. Being in the very white suburb that we grew up in, driving a nice car, he knew that he had to carry himself a certain way, a way that his friends didn't have to worry about. What I say is this: you may not fully understand what is happening, but that's why you start talking to people, and that's why you do some investigation, and you read and you learn about the history. And it may be uncomfortable. You may learn some things that make you sick to your stomach, because there's a lot of sick, twisted stuff that has happened. Now, with that being the case, that doesn't mean you can't be a positive part of the moving forward. You know, I mean, if we don't learn history, it is destined to repeat itself. Destined to. And so this is the time for you to stop watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, right? This is the time for you to, you know, put down Candy Crush, read an article or two about what's going on. You know, read an article about the civil rights movement, read an article about, you know, the suffrage movement. Understand why people are protesting. What are they protesting? Well, what injustices are there? Especially if you don't think there are any, because that's just not been part of your world. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I agree with that. Okay, another difficult question. I've seen a lot online and in the news about kneeling.
Hmm.
What's your opinion on this?
Technically, it's a genuflect.
Say that again.
I said technically it's a genuflect. I think kneeling is really when you're on both knees, and that's part of prayer. I'm not going to go down any rabbit hole stuff, but as far as the action that has been in the forefront of the news, I think when Colin Kaepernick, who was the person who brought it to the full world's attention for the reasons why, it's a lot like, you remember that dress that was all over the internet? It was a British woman who was going to wear this dress to her daughter's wedding. And she sent it out to a couple friends, and some people saw the dress and were like, oh, that's pretty. That's a lovely navy and black dress. And then some people of her friends were like, why would you wear white to your daughter's wedding? That white and gold dress, why would you do, like, that's not what you do. You don't wear white to somebody else's wedding. And she's like, what are you talking about? Because the dress was actually black and blue, but some people saw it as white and gold. And so it started going around. Do you remember seeing this?
No, I don't.
I'll send it to you. And because what I do is I use the side by side. I wish I had it. I could.
We'll put it in the link in the show notes so other people can see it too. Perfect.
But it was a big deal. And what's interesting is this went around the globe. Like, how do you see this dress? And some people saw it as white and gold, and some people saw it as black and blue. And I swear to God, it cost a couple friendships. I'm pretty sure a couple divorces happened. And the main reason people got upset with it is because everybody who saw it thought they were right. They were looking at it with their own two eyes. They knew what they saw. Now, scientifically, there was a reason why people saw it differently, right? It had to do with how our eyes take in light. And there have been a couple different examples of those things. Like, there's a new one with a tinta shoe. You either see aqua and white or blue and pink or something like that, like white and pink or gray and aqua. But long story short is, it has to go back with how we perceive things. So there were some people who saw the genuflecting as an affront to servicemen and women. And some people saw it as a silent, peaceful protest. And it had to do with where you were on the side of things, where your perception was. Now we have a clear understanding of why he was doing that, because for a lot of people who thought that it was an insult, they didn't understand, they didn't know that there was that big a problem or an issue with violence necessarily, or they were the people who looked the other way and just wanted to believe what they wanted to believe. We're not always going to see things the exact same way because we're coming from these different experiences. That doesn't make one thing right or wrong. Now, I think Colin Kaepernick was very clear in stating that he was not trying to disparage anything about the military, as he had people in his family who are part of the military. But, so much of this has to do with not just what people see, but what they want to see and what they don't want to see. And there's another great little visual of two people standing on either side of a number. And on one side, it looks like the number 9. On the other side, it looks like the number 6. So much of what we see has to do with where we're standing.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of this metaphor, and I don't remember what culture it comes from, but it's 5 blind men standing around an elephant. And they're each asked, what is this that's right in front of you? And one of them says, oh, I think it's a tree. Another one says, oh, I think it's I'm making this up. I don't remember everything, but it's like, I think it's something else. And the moral of the story is they're all blind. They're just touching the part of the elephant that's right in front of them. And if they were all talking to each other, they would have a holistic perspective of what was actually in front of them, an elephant, right? And that's why it's so great to share perspectives and to come together and be inclusive of other people's thoughts and opinions, because in a way it helps you to shed whatever, lens or filter that you've been looking at life through. And it allows you to experience life in a different way or see life through a different perspective or a lens. And I think that gives us a greater perspective, a bigger picture of what this earth life is all about. I really feel like we're here to learn love. I feel like all this upheaval is really like what's on the other side of it, the silver lining, if you will, is to learn love.
I could not agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. That's what's at the root of this. You can't, the difference between love and hate, like people think hate is the opposite of love. It's not. Indifference. And that's again why we have to go in love, to learn, to explore, to expand, to listen, and to care about each other, to care what happens to your neighbor. It's very easy to kind of stay in our own little bubbles and with our families and with our groups and, with our comfort level. Because listen, birds of a feather flock together. That's not just an expression because it rhymes. It's just what we do. But understand that people are going to have different experiences, and it's okay that you haven't had those experiences, but that doesn't mean that their experiences should be discounted, especially if it makes you a little uncomfortable. But yeah, that's what this is about. This is about love. This is about focusing again. What do we have in common more than separates us? And primarily we want to be loved. We want to feel worthy. We want to be respected. We want to be heard. People just want to be heard. And honest to God, I think, like, going back to what does Black Lives Matter mean? It means hear us. Hear us.
I love that. Well, I feel like we could end there. That is like the best final thought ever. What else is on your heart? What else would you like to share here today?
Oh, goodness. I've got 2 little kids. You got little kids. We have to do better. We have to make the world for them that we want to see. We have to instill in them a sense of honor and respect, and letting them know that, the other people in the world are their brothers and sisters, because we are genetically connected, we are. And so, I don't want them thinking that the world is full of hate and bad people and just like the awfulness that we're seeing on the news on a regular basis because it sells. So we have to we have to be responsible for passing the good stuff on to our kids so that they understand that, we're in this together.